Hey guys, it's Ernesto. Welcome back to another Monday critique. I hope you guys are having a fantastic Monday. I'm having a wonderful Monday. I know. I'm always having a wonderful or awesome Monday, but it's Monday. What else would I be? You gotta be happy about the week. The week just got started. We have two awesome images that we're gonna critique today, and I cannot wait to jump straight into it. So after this intro, let's dive into it, guys. If you guys want to submit your image to be critiqued, please join our Facebook group. It's called Fine Art Photography and Modeling. In that group, I created a specific thread where you could submit your images to be critiqued. Welcome back. So today we have an awesome image that was submitted by this gentleman. I'm sure you recognize that name because he was on the Monday Critique video from last week. So if you haven't checked out last week Monday Critique, please go and check that out. So today, with respect to this image, we're gonna start with Lite. I really like the drama that's going on in this image. It seems like you really love your drama. So in this particular image, there's a lot of drama that's going on here. I really love the story that's going on in this image. And the light that you have in this image, I really like how the light is help supporting your story. So I think from a lighting perspective, that was absolutely brilliant. Now, I think I mentioned this in the last video as well, and that is just having a little bit more detail in the shadow area of these images. And I think having just a little bit more detail would just help with that storyline. But that's just a minor thing. I just really think you really nailed it with respect to the lighting and telling the story in this image. Now, there's one other item in this image that's just a little bit distracting to me, and it doesn't help support the story at all. And that's the light rays that's coming in from camera right. Now, I'm guessing that light rays is probably coming from your light source on camera right, or you could have added it in post. I'm not really sure where it's coming from, but it's not really helping support the storyline. And the reason I say that is because on camera left of the subject, actually on camera right of the subject, which is on his left side, his left face, it's in shadow. So the fact that it's in shadow and then you have this light source coming in from camera right, it just doesn't help support that storyline, because you basically, at least in my head, I'm saying to myself, you have this light source coming from camera right, why would his face be in shadow? And that's the thing that I'm struggling with in my head when I look at this image. So to me, it would make a lot more sense if that light ray was coming in from camera left, because his face is properly lit on camera left, and that would make total sense to me when I look at the image, because I say, oh, we have this light ray coming in, we have this bright part of his face, and it would just connect. With the light rays coming from camera right, it just doesn't help sell your story. But like I said, I think overall from a story perspective and the lighting perspective, I think you really did a great job here with that lighting. So with that said, I will move on to the next section. All right, guys, now let's move on to the pose in this image. So from a posing perspective, I really like the pose. The pose is really powerful in this image. It just helps sell that storyline. I don't think there's anything that I could say from a posing perspective that can help improve upon what you already have here. I think is really great. So, with that said, I'll just move on to the next section. But again, great job with that pose. All right, guys, now let's move on to the composition in this image. So from a compositional perspective, there's not much to critique with respect to the composition in this image. I really like the composition. The composition is great. We have some great negative space. So I really think that's awesome the way it's set up. The only two things that distracts me in this image from a compositional perspective, and I already talked about one of them, and that's the light rays that's coming in from camera right. I really don't think that offers much. Probably make more sense to put it to camera left. And then the object that's directly behind the subject, I'm not really sure what that is, but that's a nitpicky thing as well. So those are the only two things that distract me from a compositional perspective. And then this one last item that I'd like to mention with respect to the composition is when someone is looking off to camera left, sometimes it plays to have the composition or the negative space in the area that they're looking towards, right? Sometimes that helps and sometimes it don't help. It all depends on the context. It depends on what you're trying to do here. So I'm not saying that in your particular image that you need to basically have the negative space on camera left as opposed to how it is in camera right. I think the balance that you have going on here is pretty okay. But I think in general, for other folks that's out there, if you're having a composition where your negative space is in the opposite direction of where your subject is looking, sometimes that doesn't work out. I'm not saying there's a rule of thumb that you always have to do it, because I generally don't follow it. But, you know, just look at your composition, look at the mood that your image is trying to, you know, tell you, and you basically figure out if that composition works for you or not. But I think in this particular image, there's a very happy balance here of, you know, negative space both on the left and the right side of the frame. Obviously, it's more geared towards the right side of the frame as far as the negative space is concerned. So I just think that the composition here is totally fine, and I hope that was helpful. All right, guys, moving on to image number 2. So this particular image was submitted by this gentleman. Thank you very much, George, for submitting your image. Let's jump into it. So from a lighting perspective, in this image, George utilized two light sources, ambient light and artificial light. So we have a blending of these two light sources in this image. One of the things that people struggle with, especially new photographers that they struggle with, is trying to balance, you know, ambient light and artificial light. And George, I would say you are on the right track to trying to get those two things done, or balance, I should say. So let's talk about a couple of things that's going on in this image and how we could adjust certain things to help with respect to the lighting. Okay, so when I'm working with these two light sources, ambient light and artificial light, the very first thing that you always try to do, forgetting the artificial light for a minute, but the very first thing that you try to do is try to get your ambient light under control. And what I mean by that is basically trying to get your exposure to where you want it to be for the background, okay? And not necessarily for your subject, just the background, just trying to get that happy balance for the background. Now, when I'm basically utilizing an ambient light and artificial light, is that I try to blend the two so that you don't see much of the flash, right? You try to get that happy balance where it just feels like the flash is not even there. It just feels like you utilize an ambient light to help light the subjects. And I think for the most part, when I look back at certain images, it's kind of hard to figure out if I use flash or just use ambient light. Sometimes it's just a little bit difficult to figure it out. But that's what I would suggest with respect to your image. Now, you could also take your image to be a little bit more dramatic in the sense that you could really pull down the ambient light on the background so that it's very dramatic. And certain photographers do that, which is totally fine. But here's what I would say with respect to your image is, one, I would drop the exposure down just a little bit more so it's less powerful on the background, and let the light on your subject be a little bit more powerful so that the subject could stand out a little bit more from the background. Okay, so that's my first thing to do there with respect to your light. Get the ambient under control, drop that exposure a little bit so that it's not as powerful, and then get your exposure up a little bit more on your subject. So that's what the first thing I would have done there from a lighting perspective. All right, so here's a tip with respect to working with two subjects where one is a lighter shade and the other one is a darker shade. So what I try to do is I would basically position the artificial light bias towards more of the person with the darker shade. And I would try to bring up my exposure a little bit on the camera for the lighter shade person. Or I would try to feather the light a little bit so that the light could hit the lighter shaded person. But the struggle that you would have is that if you expose for the lighter shade person with your light, that person will be properly exposed. But then what ends up happening with darker shaded person is that person would just basically end up in shadow a little bit. So you want to basically make sure that the light is a little bit more biased towards the darker shaded person so that when you take the shot, that person will be properly exposed, and then the lighter shade person would also be properly exposed. Or you can basically expose properly for a lighter shaded person, and then in post you can basically bring up the shadows on the darker shaded person and then help balance those two things out. But if you want to get it right in camera, that's what I would suggest that you do there. Make the light a little bit more biased to the darker shaded person and you should be good to go. So when I look at this image, that's what I think is going on here. You could see that the lighter shaded person is properly exposed, and you could see her a little bit more, but then he falls back into shadow just a little bit. So from a lighting perspective, I hope that information was helpful. Let's move on. All right, guys, now let's move on to the pose in this image. So from a posing perspective, what we have here is a very lovely couple and a very nice pose. It's a pose that I myself had utilized in the past. So this is like a very standard pose that I would definitely fall into to try to get the ball rolling, right? And these are like your bread and butter cookie cutter type shots that you want to get. And then after you get these standard shots, you basically would move on to trying to get something a little bit more creative. If you could come up with something that's a little bit more creative. Sometimes I get like, totally, I go blank and basically I don't have anything creative, but at least you have all those, bread and butter cookie cutter shots that you would need to have, such as this one. So with this kind of shot, the only thing I would say with respect to this pose is the following. In most of my videos, you'll notice that I always ask the subject, couple, whatever the case may be, is to basically push their lower portions away from the camera and then push the upper portion, which is their face, closer to the camera. And the reason I do that is try to de-emphasize the lower portion of the subject and emphasize the person's face. And it also helps correct the perspective as well, depending on how you are, composing the shot and whatnot. So those are the things that I try to do to help, de-emphasize, a subject that's a little bit fuller and emphasize the face. So that's what I would have done here with respect to this couple, is just ask them to basically, push their lower portions away from the camera and bring their faces a little bit closer to it. So now with these types of poses, you can also get a variety of different looks with respect to, the couple. Some could be, with the gentleman looking into the subject, which is, just basically connecting his temple to her temple. So he won't be looking at the camera, she will be looking at the camera, and then she could be looking down and his head could still be into the, to her temple, and, you could get another shot that way as well. So you could get a variety of different types of shots with just this very standard pose. And it's different images for every time you take a shot. So, if you're struggling with trying to come up with different poses, in this one single setup, you can have a variety of different poses, and you could just keep going in from one pose to the next pose with this basic structure that's here. And then when you're ready to move on to something that basically breaks the structure, so it helps you free up your mind so that the next time you have to break the structure, you will know, okay, when I break this structure or this foundation, then I know when I move them into the next structure and foundation that, I can put them into a more creative pose. But at least in this setup, you will have a variety of different looks and a variety of different images. Just, simply playing with, whether they look at the camera, not look at the camera, look off, both of them looked off to find, something to look at. But there's a lot of things that you could do with respect to this pose. I just think you could just push it just a little bit more and just help, make your clients look the best by just simply, de-emphasizing certain things that you don't want to emphasize. The other thing here is, the female subject's arm, trying to, reduce that as much as possible by simply either having the husband or the boyfriend or fiance, I'm not really sure which one they are, just basically have him to help, hide or reduce, her arm just a little bit. Or you could, from a creative perspective with your composition, come in a little bit closer and crop that just a little bit to help. We're going to get to that when we get to composition. But overall, I think with respect to the pose, I think the pose is fine. Like I said, I've used this basic structure as well on multiple of my photo shoots. This is just something just to get me going, because not that every time when you show up on a photo shoot, you have the most brilliant ideas and ready to go. But, you have all of these basic poses that you would do just to get the ball rolling and get the couple comfortable. And then when they're comfortable, you're comfortable, then we can, be more creative. So great job with, putting together this basic fundamental pose. I hope you guys had a lot of fun on that shoot. It looks like it was a little bit hot, but awesome job, man. Moving on. All right, guys, now let's move on to the composition in this image. So from a compositional perspective, I really love what you were trying to go for here with respect to the composition, trying to include that negative space on camera left. That is awesome. A couple of issues that I have with respect to the composition is about the execution, okay? And what I mean by that is if you look on camera left, which is where your negative space is, there's a couple of things in here that's a little bit distracting. And it distracts me away from your subject. And with the composition, for the most part with compositions, you want to basically help focus the viewer into your subject, not necessarily distract the viewer away from your subject. So when I look at camera left, the first thing that distracts me away from your subject is that water fountain. I think is a water fountain. Correct me if I'm wrong, the water basically coming out. That's basically what I'm saying. That water, the water that's coming out of there is just distracting to me. And it distracts me away from the subject. And then, you have that, green stuff, the algae basically on the wall. It's just, you don't want to see that in conjunction to your subject. You want to basically crop that stuff out. So my suggestion is probably maybe you want to go portrait style on this particular image to help crop that stuff out, because you don't want to show that in your image. It's not something that anyone would want to see. So that's what I would suggest there. Just, crop it out, go vertical, which is portrait, and crop that stuff out. So a couple other things with respect to the composition is the building, and where the building intersects with the subject's head, the male subject's head. So from a compositional perspective, when I look at this image and the building and the subject head, it just makes me feel like the subject is being cut off right down the center. So I would say pay attention to those types of things. Any type of vertical or horizontal lines that is intersecting with your couple, and you have to see if that line is helping to sell your story, or if it's just going to help distract people away from your subject. And in this particular case, that's what it's doing. It's just basically distracted me away from your subject, and you don't want to do that. You want to basically help minimize as much as possible any type of distraction away from your subject. And then the last thing with respect to the composition is the object that's growing out of the male subject, left shoulder. So you basically want to hide that as much as possible with your subject's body. So one of the things I could have done here is you could have moved your camera angle maybe to camera left and utilize his body just a little bit more to help block that object in the background, or you could have lowered your camera angle to help block that item in the back. So that's it. That's all I have to say with respect to your composition. Let's move on. All right, guys, now let's get into the rating of these two images. Light. I gave this image a 3. Pose. I gave this image a 5. Composition. I gave this image a 5. Overall, this image received a rating of 4.33 out of 5. All right, guys, now let's move on to image number 2. Light. I gave this image a 2. Pose. I gave this image a 3. Composition. I gave this image a 2. Overall, this image received a rating of 2.33 out of 5. That is it, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in and watching this video. I want to thank the image creators for submitting your images. I hope you guys got a great deal of information from what I had to say, and I hope the viewers of this video also got some great information and tips from what I had to say. Now, if you guys want to contribute and add any additional feedback, helpful feedback that is over and above what I already had to say, that will help the image creators, please drop those comments down below so that we could keep this conversation going. Now, if you guys like this video, please hit that thumbs up button. If you have any feedback that you would like to give me, please drop that comment down below. Now, if you would like to share this video with a friend, a colleague, an associate, a family member that you would think that this video would help, please share this video with them. Lastly, if you got this far in the video, you must be enjoying this content. So please hit that subscribe button. And guys, I will see you next Monday.